From the Gert Boyle studio, it's OPB Politics Now for Friday, March 7th. Managing money can be challenging. Sometimes it feels like the good times are rolling, and then one peek at the bank account prompts existential dread. Multnomah County and the city of Portland are facing just such a moment. But down in Salem, things are different. It's budget time across the government world, and it's sort of remarkable how different things are depending where you look. We're going to explain why. Welcome to the podcast. I'm OPB Politics reporter Lauren Dake.
I'm OPB City Hall reporter Alex Zielinski.
And I'm OPB Politics reporter Dirk Vanderhart.
Alex, let's start with you. I think it makes the most sense to talk about Multnomah County. We've had a lot of conversations here on this very podcast about how the county, and I'm going to use this word appropriately, literally could not spend the windfall it reaped from the Metro Homeless Service Tax. That's the voter-approved tax on high-income households across Washington, Clackamas, and Multnomah counties. And then last month, County Chair Jessica Vega Peterson presented a very different story. What happened?
Yeah, so first let's do a little table setting for people not as absorbed in budgets as us. The city and the county rely on a fiscal year budget, which starts on July 1st and ends on June 30th. So we're talking about the next fiscal year, which starts in July. So back to the supportive housing services tax. Like you said, it's an income tax on high-income households and businesses in the 3 metro counties. And those counties then distribute that money to programs that help people move into housing from homelessness. In Multnomah County, most of that money goes to the county's Homeless Services Department, which until recently was called the Joint Office of Homeless Services. So this tax went into effect in 2021, and it initially overperformed and brought in way more than anticipated, more than $100 million in revenue to Multnomah County than expected. Like you said, the county had a hard time getting that money out the door quickly, mostly because it just hadn't planned on getting that much money and didn't have the right system set up to deal with it. They were so slow at this that Metro penalized them and forced them to create a plan to swiftly spend their extra cash, and they did. Last year, the county spent every penny of its tax revenue, which is where the problem lies. Basically, the county used a lot of that temporary extra money to fund permanent critical programs like shelters and outreach programs. And the boom times for that tax is now behind us. It's now leveling off, and it's not delivering extra cash to keep those programs operational that need to keep running. So that puts the Homeless Services Department budget in the red. They're estimating a budget deficit close to $70 million.
Okay, well, I think there were rumblings for a while that the county budget was going to be bad, but it wasn't clear that the homeless service budget would be quite so bad. And other politicians also appeared to react to this news with quite a bit of shock.
Yeah, everyone appeared pretty blindsided by this news. And it matters, right? Because this revenue impacts the entire metro region in the state. One interesting thing I learned in this news is that 40% of the state's homeless population live in Multnomah County. So leaders are worried. They're also not thrilled that Multnomah is asking for their help to fix their budget problems. To be specific, the county wants $55 million from the state and $30 million from Metro. I think the strongest backlash on this came from Metro Council President Lynn Peterson, who, like many others, largely blamed Multnomah County Chair Jessica Vega Peterson for this. Here she is not long after Vega Peterson announced the budget issues.
Chair Vega Peterson's actions on Friday highlight the trust issues the electorate has with government in general and have doubled overnight by the lack of transparency and crying of wolf.
To be clear, yes, she said crying of wolf. So since this happened, both Peterson and Governor Kotek have sent the county a letter with a bunch of questions about how they handle their tax revenue and budget, kind of ask them to open the books before either of them decide to hand over any money. They give the county a March 14th deadline to get back to them, and after which they'll consider giving them money. It's a bit of a standoff for now.
Fun. Okay, well, homelessness obviously is one of the top issues in the state right now, and Multnomah County and the city of Portland are really the epicenter of this. How could this budget news play out politically for leaders like Jessica Vega Peterson and newly elected Mayor Keith Wilson of Portland?
Yeah, well, Vega Peterson remains the local politician with the lowest public approval rating, and I don't think this has helped at all. And as you can tell with the responses from other electeds, she's worsening her relationships with other officials in the process. Worth noting that her term as chair ends next year, and it's unclear if she plans to run for re-election. And in terms of Mayor Wilson, This county budget, the problems here could really torpedo his homelessness plan. Listeners may remember that Wilson has this ambitious campaign pledge to eliminate unsheltered homelessness in Portland by next year. That goal relies on opening up a lot of new shelter beds quickly, and it's not just city-funded beds. Wilson's plan counts on the county's pledge to open up more shelter beds as well. So if the county is unable to, that jeopardizes his big campaign promise. I should also note that the city needs to find $28 million to cover its own obligations to his shelter plan, and none of that has been identified yet either. So there's a lot in limbo.
Okay. Well, let's turn more specifically to the city of Portland's budget. You mentioned Mayor Wilson's plan. The city's budget hole is pretty dire. Why are Portland's woes so pronounced?
Right. So all in, the city is facing a budget gap of $93 million. It's made up of a lot of factors, from expiring pandemic-related federal funding, the American Rescue Plan Act, to inflation problems, to police and fire overtime costs, and to property and business tax revenues dropping due to office vacancies in Portland. There's also a dip in permitting and parking registration fees and other utility payments Portlanders make that keep the city running. And then there's Wilson's big unfunded shelter project. So it's a lot.
So what is being talked about to address these cuts?
We're in really early stages of budget talks. So any hypothetical cuts are just that right now, hypothetical. So far, we've seen some recommendations from City Administrator Michael Jordan about ways the council and the mayor could trim the budget. It's things that we hear about kind of every year, cuts to street repair, park maintenance, and fewer community center hours, cuts to permitting review departments. There's no golden bullet. Here's how Jordan put it last week.
There aren't really any good choices here, okay? And so what we've tried to do is frame a number of questions and options for people to get feedback.
So as a reminder, it will really be up to the mayor to suggest which areas to cut in his draft budget, which comes out in early May. So right now, it's just a lot of concepts floating around that will be debated in public town halls over the next few months before that goes ahead.
This is all happening with a new city council and a new government, of which you have spent a lot of time writing about, Alex. How is this going to play out politically with this budget cycle?
Yeah, so you're right. This is the first time the budget is going through this new form of government in Portland, which is slightly different than in the past, since we have this new administrator office that is drafting the early budget recommendations. And the new council is made up of some longtime elected officials who have experience with budgets, and it also has a lot of brand new faces. So folks who are kind of critical of this new process or used to the way it used to be, and then people who really don't know what they don't know. They don't know what's what. So everyone is really navigating it their own way for now.
All right, thank you. Dirk, let's turn to you and our lovely Salem Bureau. We just heard a lot of bad news from the city and the county, but that's not the same message that's coming from the state capitol. Why is that?
Yeah, I mean, that I think is an interesting question. It is true we are seeing all sorts of shortfalls in not only Portland, Multnomah County, but school districts. And at the same time, the state really isn't feeling quite that same pinch right now. Oregon actually has a new state economist. His name is Carl Riccadonna. He's shifted how the state builds its revenue forecasts, and those are used to sort of build the next 2-year budget. And right now, those forecasts have been very positive. Actually, just last week, lawmakers learned that they could expect an additional $350 million as they work up the budget this year. That builds on about $1 billion more that Riccadonna suggested the state could expect in his last forecast just 3 months ago. But, I think the basic answer, Lauren, is that the state just pulls from different revenue streams than local governments, right? Like the city, which is dependent on property taxes, which, as Alex just pointed out, are maybe decreasing because of some of the issues with building vacancy. Oregon, meanwhile, gets most of its general fund revenue from income taxes. And while it does share some of that money with local governments, they just really have different pools they're pulling from. Income taxes right now, and actually corporate excise taxes, have surged in recent years, which means the state has more and more money to work with. Property taxes, not only, are there the challenges Alex talked about with building vacancies, but they are also constrained in how much they can grow because of decisions voters made in the 90s. And I think that often plays into problems with local government funding.
Okay, so we've seen a lot of positive revenue forecasts come out of Salem, but we also know, because we have spent many days reporting this, that there's a lot of uncertainty in Salem, too. I mean, certainly there are a lot of unknowns with federal funding, which the state heavily relies on. Inflation feels like it's just sort of eating up everything. And then just everywhere you look in state government, from the roads and the the transportation package to child welfare to the public defender crisis to schools and firefighting, all those things. It seems like people are saying, they all need more money there. So how does that square with these positive revenue forecasts?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, that's absolutely true. What we have heard from Governor Tina Kotek is, the state is preparing for what she has called a stability budget. That essentially means Kotek is counting on funding pretty much existing services in a lot of places and then continuing to put money and maybe a little more money into the big three things she deems important, which, as we know, are schools, housing and homelessness, and mental health and addiction services. So, just because the state doesn't feel like it needs to take austerity measures right now doesn't mean there aren't those big challenges that you are laying out, Lauren. People want even more money for schools. Lawmakers are trying to see, as you suggested, if they can find billions of dollars in additional money for roads that Kotek didn't include in her budget. Same thing goes for wildfire prevention, public defense, mental health care. I mean, we could go on and on. And as you suggested, all of that could be thrown into chaos if there are steep federal cuts to a program like Medicaid, which probably would force Oregon to redirect a lot of its general fund money into the Oregon Health Plan to make sure people can maintain their health care. I think the question of federal funding is really hanging over this session at this point. A lot of bills' fates are in its hands, but you are right. I mean, just because we're not talking about a budget bloodbath doesn't mean there aren't some concerns about whether we can fund our priorities.
Typically, the political divide here is, Democrats feeling comfortable raising taxes to pay for services they think are important, while Republicans often call for stricter spending limits and more focus on actual budgeting. We've already seen some of that start to play out this session so far, but what's your take on how that's going to affect the rest of the session?
Yeah, I mean, the dynamic is alive and well, I would say, in Salem. Like I said, Democrats are trying to figure out how to pay for transportation. And that is a big focus, and it is likely to include, they say, higher gas taxes, for instance, maybe higher vehicle registration fees, maybe a lot of other kinds of new taxes or fees they could cobble together to get more money. Republicans have so far been, I would say, pretty adamant that the state can shuffle money around and find efficiencies in ODOT, which, by the way, they say is badly mismanaged, rather than raising taxes. We haven't seen a hard proposal for that, but that has been their consistent sort of position. What we did see this week, though, was, I think, an early test of how raising taxes for transportation or really anything might be received this year. Democrats took up a bill to tax new tire sales in the state at 4%. They said that would raise something like $20 million a year. And that saw pretty heavy backlash. I think 1,600 pieces of testimony in opposition compared to far fewer, in support. It seemed largely that backlash came from more conservative Oregonians. Many say it's not the time to be hiking taxes, but I think it will be interesting to see whether that same dynamic plays out across the wider scope, of revenue-raising measures that Dems are going to come up with.
Old Les Schwab spinning around in his grave on that one. All right, you spent some time talking to the state's budget writers this session. What big budget battles do you anticipate happening?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if battle is the word. Maybe we'll get there, but there certainly are major questions right now. Will the legislature find an additional $1.7 billion for the Department of Transportation? That's what Governor Tina Kotek has called on Democrats to do. Beyond that, actually, the state likely needs billions more to finish existing road projects, but that will just be one. Then, lawmakers, I think, as we've talked about on the podcast, are trying to find a way to create a sustainable funding source so that the state can better prepare for wildfires. That would maybe help us avoid things like last December's special session, where they had to come in an emergency and try to figure out a way to pay all these contractors who helped us fight fires last year. I would say that problem is one that currently looks like it has few obvious answers and a lot of uncertainty on whether we can come to some agreement there. And then, as you know, Lauren, schools are always a budget hot potato, especially at a time like right now where, Oregon is showing its students have not recovered from the pandemic as fast as other states. I think, as we talked about, plenty of school districts say they have big funding challenges for reasons like pension obligations or higher teacher pay. Governor Tina Kotek says she wants to put $600 million more into that. I think we will hear plenty of people call for even more. The question is whether there's money to go around.
All right, Alex, Dirk, thank you guys for breaking down the budgets for us. This week's episode was produced by Andrew Thien, our audio engineer is Nalene Silva, and our music comes from Audio Network. In these uncertain times, we are certain you have questions about local politics, and hey, maybe we can answer them. We would love to hear from you. Email us at opbpoliticsnow@opb.org. We'll be back next week with more political news from across the Pacific Northwest. Until then, you can find all of OPB's reporting at opb.org. Thank you for your support, and thank you for listening.